Today on Christian World News, they're the most persecuted religious group in the world and also the largest. Find out what's being done to stop the oppression against Christians. And massacre in Tucson. An attack on a U.S. Congresswoman leaves her critically wounded and 6 others dead. And one man gives his life to save his wife. Plus, from one of the world's most repressive regimes comes a song of praise. See why these house churches are out in the open. Scores of Christians are arrested and jailed in Iran. Hello, everyone. I'm Wendy Griffith. George Thomas is on assignment. Iran is carrying out a new crackdown on Christians. Elim Ministries reports the government raided a number of Christian homes the day after Christmas. 25 were arrested. 11 Christians have since been released, but authorities still have 14 in custody. And since the Christmas attacks, the regime has arrested at least another 30 to 40 Christians, possibly as many as 600. Middle East Concern reports the Governor General of Tehran province says the Christians were arrested for their, quote, corrupting influence, and he warns more arrests are coming. Well, this week, Pope Benedict called on governments around the world to do more to protect religious minorities. He specifically cited several Muslim nations in Africa and the Middle East. Most persecution comes from Muslim radicals and Islamic governments. Paul Strand has a look at this persecution and why you aren't hearing about it in the news media.
Christians may well be the most persecuted religious group on the planet. They number some 2.2 billion people, and harassment can range from loss of life to loss of livelihood.
Including discrimination, you're talking 600, 700 million Christians.
In about 2/3 of the world, Christians of one stripe or another face some sort of harassment.
It goes back to the time of Jesus and his disciples, but is increasing rapidly in this new century.
Christians in innumerable countries are under huge amounts of pressure, either from the government or from the societies in which they find themselves.
Throughout the 20th century, communist countries caused the most problems for Christians. Today, however, the fear and harassment is shifting to the Muslim world. Open Doors USA tracks this persecution and puts out a watch list every January of the worst offenders. Open Doors President Carl Muller says in this year's top 10,
8 of those are Islamic countries.
Iraq jumped into the top 10 this year because of many recent brutal attacks, like the massacre of 58 Christians in a Baghdad church this past October.
The level of brutality is almost unbelievable.
We're actually labeling it a religious side, as extremists there want to exterminate all Christians from the country of Iraq.
Muslim extremists in Pakistan have been killing Christians at an increasing rate for what they call blasphemy against Islam and the Prophet Muhammad.
Christians are being accused of blaspheming Islam by converting from Islam to Christianity.
This violence is even happening in Muslim countries that were seen as more secular.
Christians have started to be killed on religious grounds in Turkey. That's new.
How do Muslims justify this hatred against Christians?
They're infidels, they're unbelievers in what is a Muslim land.
There is still plenty of persecution outside the Muslim world, like in China and India. But for good reason, North Korea has headed up Open Doors' watch list for 9 years in a row now.
If you're caught as a Christian in North Korea, say simply leading a Bible study or even owning a Bible, you can be thrown into a labor camp that is exactly like the old Soviet Union's gulag, where people are literally worked to death.
What's surprising is how little you hear about this here in the West, in the very countries that were founded as Christian nations and contain huge Christian majorities. Some blame it on the elites that control the media and educational institutions. The elites that can only imagine Christians as persecutors, not victims.
We've had elite universities basically teaching their undergraduates that the only villains in history who oppressed others for religious reasons were the Christians.
Marshall says these elites, both here and in Europe, are often openly hostile towards the faith.
Europeans who can otherwise be laid back, they get very angry about Christians.
There's really an unwillingness to accept the fact that Christians have become an endangered species in some countries of the world.
For many secular types in the media and elites,
Religion awakens, touches on areas they're uncomfortable with, so they just want it to go away. For them, it's like the fingernails on the blackboard.
As for the U.S. government, Aikman worries the Obama administration, or at least Obama himself,
has not been nearly as articulate and forceful on religious freedom issues as President Bush.
The problem is that can have real and deadly consequences.
Many countries that were contemplating some kind of crackdown on Christians think, well, it doesn't really matter. The U.S. is not going to say anything. They're not going to complain. So let's go ahead and make life harder for our Christian minorities.
It can result in imprisonment, torture, and even martyrdom for the cause of Jesus Christ.
Paul Strand, CBN News.
2001 is already a deadly year for Egypt's Christians. The latest attack took place in southern Egypt. An off-duty policeman boarded a train and opened fire, killing a 71-year-old Christian man and injuring 5 others. Hundreds of Coptic Christians took to the streets in protest, calling on the government to protect them. Just 2 weeks ago, a suicide bomber killed 21 Christians outside of a church. Meanwhile, Egypt angrily recalled its ambassador to the Vatican after the Pope voiced his concerns. In neighboring Sudan, Christians in the south are awaiting the results of a vote to decide if they will secede from the Muslim north. More than 2 million people in southern Sudan cast their ballots this week. Now comes the counting, which could take weeks. The final tally is expected to result in the south splitting from the north. The north has long resisted southern separatist demands. The Muslim government brutally targeted Christians in the south during a bloody 23-year civil war. That ended in 2005, and the peace deal called for this week's vote. About 2 million people were killed in that civil war. Well, joining us now to talk more about Christianity and Islam in Africa is Dr. Clifton Clark. He's an associate professor of global missions at Regent University and an expert on Africa. And Dr. Clark, let's start with Sudan. What's the nature of the conflict there between the north and the south?
Yes, indeed. Well, the nature of the conflict is that it's both religious, it's ethnic, and it's historical. And you need to go back to the colonial period where the British, along with the Egyptians, actually ruled, colonized Sudan, and together they kind of divided the country up into the north and the south because the north was so different from the south. So it was kind of a divide and rule. And since then, there's been a conflict between the two. And
of course, for the last 23 years, I mean, it's just been brutal and deadly, and mainly a religious conflict between the Muslim north and the Christian south.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that around about 1956 to 1972, there's been tremendous bloodshed there. And there was a peace accord in 1972, but then they tried to impose Sharia law, the new government, which didn't go down well for the South. And then again, from 1972 to 2005, there was also bloodshed.
Now, is this war on hold right now, and is there a danger of another war?
Well, I think that the referendum which came out of the peace accord that was brokered in 2005, part of that accord was that there would be a referendum in 2011. And so there is a possibility of another war. I think Hillary Clinton was right when she said that this referendum is actually a ticking time bomb, because it could go either way. If it goes for the north, then there could be problems in the south reacting against it. If it goes for the south, then of course the north are going to react against it. I think a lot of it depends on how the international community actually focuses on the conflict, right, and ensures that if it goes for the south, then the referendum is carried out.
Let's talk about Egypt. We mentioned earlier the attacks on Christians. Why do you think attacks are increasing in Egypt? I mean, the Coptic Christian Church has been there for over 1,000 years.
Well, actually, Christianity is growing at an alarming rate, at a great rate, really.
Depends on your perspective, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There are 470 million Christians in Africa. And a lot of them are Muslims who are turning to Jesus Christ. And this is, of course, alarming for a lot of Muslims. So places like Egypt, and it's not just in Sudan or in Egypt, places like Iraq and Afghanistan, there's tremendous persecution because the amount of Christians who are converting, the amount of Muslims that are converting to Islam. The amount of Muslims that are converting to Christianity, sorry.
Let's talk about Africa now. Is this continent part of a larger struggle?
Well, Africa has always been caught in between the sort of ideological struggles that takes place in the world, whether it's sort of the Cold War, you know, whether it's communism or capitalism. Because Africa is a place of tremendous conflict, unrest, it's kind of fair game, it's a fertile ground for places like, for conflicts and for religions to kind of spread.
And Dr. Clark, why do the Middle Eastern countries want to spread their Islamic influence in Africa? What do they have to gain by that?
Well, you know, Africa, there's a lot of borders between Europe, and a lot of the times they can actually get access to Europe via the places like Nigeria and Ghana and other places. And also, I think that, you know, Africa's got a lot of wealth and a lot of influence there. And so, you know, Africa is one of those places where the Islamic Ummah, the community of Islam, can actually be established.
And of course, that's part of the Islamic philosophy, is to spread...
Well, absolutely, yeah.
You know, their religion as far and wide as they can.
Yes.
And I guess they see an open door in Africa.
Yeah, Africa is definitely an open door, and it's important that Christians around the world begin to pray for Africa, because there's a lot of Islamic persecution taking place, particularly in places like Nigeria, against Christians.
But the good news is the Christian church is growing by leaps and bounds in Africa.
Absolutely, particularly within the sort of Pentecostal and charismatic tradition. You find that, like I said, there are 470 million Christians in Africa alone. That's 1 in 5 Christians around the world actually are in Africa. So it's great revival, and that's great news for the Christian church.
More Christians than Muslims in Africa right now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Dr. Clifton Clark, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
And coming up, when the bullets started flying in Tucson, this man sacrificed himself to protect his wife. Learn more about him right after this.
Also available in podcast. The in-depth insights into our reporter blogs.
Taliban kidnapped at least 18 South Korean Christians.
Your online news source for complete coverage of the global church.
Have you ever wondered why some people seem to achieve success so readily? They're able to see opportunities all around themselves. Conquering challenges and achieving success. How is it others are able to overcome destructive behaviors and find true satisfaction in life? And what enables some people to have such faith in God that they see miraculous answers to their prayers? The answer to these questions and how to live a victorious life are found in the secret laws of God's kingdom.
In Pat Robertson's latest teaching, The Secret Kingdom Volume 3, you'll discover powerful keys to unlock the miraculous in your life.
As you follow the laws of the secret kingdom and make them a part of your life, the results will be nothing short of incredible.
If I could build this big, strong body, this armor around myself, then nobody could hurt me again. I felt like if my mother didn't love me, my biological father didn't love me, then how in the world could anybody else love me? God loves us, and He wants the best for us. I'm living proof of that. Just give Him a chance.
U.S. Representative Gabrielle Giffords is recovering in a Tucson hospital after an attempt on her life this week. Authorities say 22-year-old Jared Loughner shot the Arizona congresswoman and 19 others at a political event. 6 people died in the attack, including a federal judge and a 9-year-old girl. Another victim was 76-year-old Doran Stoddard. He was an active worker in his church. He died while trying to protect his wife. CBN News' Chuck Colton spoke with Stoddard's pastor about what happened that day and how God is moving in the community.
Well, Doran was a real hero. He dove on his wife and saved her life, didn't he?
When I talked to Mavi in the hospital, she told me that when they heard the gunshot wounds, he grabbed her and he pulled her down and he ended up on top of her. Her wounds were minor. She got shot in the leg, but unfortunately he was shot in the head, and she believes that that shot could have happened to her if it wasn't for him falling on top of her. When I talked to Mavi in the hospital, I asked her, how do you feel? And she said, I'm so happy that Doran is now in heaven waiting me, and that's what keeps her going.
How do you see God working in this tragedy?
I've been pastor here 15 years, and I've never seen people come together so well as we have since this tragedy. I'm not saying that this was needed for our community, but so many people have been drawn together because of this, and God has been praised throughout this whole time.
President Obama spoke at a memorial service for the victims later in the week. Well, a year ago this week, a 7.0 earthquake ravaged Haiti, killing more than 300,000 people and leaving more than 1 million homeless. CBN contributor Russ Jones traveled to Haiti to bring us this update on how Christian ministries are helping people recover.
Tens of thousands gathered for a memorial service Wednesday in downtown Port-au-Prince to remember those whose lives were lost. Harsh reminders of slow progress surrounded the event, as only 5% of the rubble has been removed, making reconstruction difficult. Thousands still live in tent cities with limited food and water supplies. An outbreak of cholera has also slowed progress. Organizations like Samaritan's Purse have redirected resources to treat the highly contagious disease.
We've built 10,600 shelters, but when the cholera hit and we made the determination to respond here to Cité Soleil, we stopped the shelter program, and the team came here and constructed this entire compound in 9 days.
Cholera has claimed the lives of over 2,000 Haitians and sickened thousands more. But staff with Samaritan's Purse are actively using a creative campaign to educate Haitians about the threats of a disease that will not likely go away anytime soon.
It's going to be a fact of life in Haiti, just like it has become a fact of life in other places of the world. And so behavior will need to change.
Living in Haiti with 2 legs was difficult alone, but imagine now, since the earthquake, 8,000 to 10,000 new amputees. At Mission of Hope Haiti, they've opened a prosthetic clinic where Haitians are helping Haitians, and the clinic is here to stay. 9-year-old Dooley lost his leg from the earthquake, but trained technicians at Mission of Hope are fitting him for a new prosthesis.
I love it because I get to see people get hope that they didn't have before, and I get to see people's lives change dramatically.
Dooley is one of some 75 earthquake victims who has received a prosthetic limb through the clinic at no cost to his family.
When they come here, they get a leg, they walk, and they back to the business, they back to the feed.
Mission of Hope also feeds some 50,000 children per day through its feeding program and has around 2,500 students in its school. Just recently, the government donated 100 acres to the ministry for a new housing development to transition Haitians from temporary housing. 500 new homes are in the initial development plan. After 5 years of payments, the home is then deeded over to the occupant. For Brad Johnson, his work in Haiti is truly a labor of love.
It's been a hard year, but at the same time, it's been an incredible, fruitful year as well. We've seen God do so much in a year's time because of what happened at the earthquake and the world's attention coming to Haiti.
Since 1998, the ministry has been one of the true first responders, serving millions of meals and attending to the needs of thousands of patients. And it's organizations like Mission of Hope that's helping Haitians walk on solid ground.
One of our values is indigenous mobilization. We don't want a North American here if a Haitian can do that job.
For CBN News, Russ Jones in Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
CBN's Operation Blessing is also on the ground in Haiti. One of the ministry's current projects is the construction of a new surgical center. The center will be located behind St. Damien, Haiti's main pediatric hospital. After the quake, St. Damien was overwhelmed with people in need of emergency care, so the hospital decided to expand and begin serving adults as well. Well, coming up next, from one of the world's most repressive regimes comes a song of praise. See why these house churches are out in the open right after this.
It's the one thing news viewers can agree on.
They want change.
Now, the world's leading Christian news organization brings you national, international news and analysis throughout the day. Mornings, the busy lunch hour, late afternoon, and evenings. It's news with a Christian perspective whenever you want it. Available on the web 24/7 at cbnnews.com.
You and I live in a visible world, yet there is at work all around us an invisible kingdom of unlimited goodness and power. In the Bible, Jesus Christ has given us fundamental kingdom principles that are as valid in our world today as the law of gravity. These principles can overcome every obstacle or circumstance we encounter and guarantee our success.
In The Secret Kingdom Volume 3, the final teaching in the inspiring DVD series, Pat Robertson reveals how the power of God's kingdom works and unlocks the secrets of fidelity, miracles, and dominion. Powerful principles that will change your life.
You can reach from a world of impossibilities into a realm of limitless possibility and power.
The Secret Kingdom Volume 3, available now.
I became a slave to it. It got really, really addictive for me. I said, God, you have to deliver me out of this. Of that moment, God laid her hands on me. My God instantly delivered. I didn't have any more feeling to smoke, to use crack cocaine. I didn't want any of that anymore. And if he could change me, he could change anyone.
For decades, they faced arrest, torture, and death for their faith. Today, Chinese Christians are getting bolder about sharing their faith openly. And now, one of the largest underground churches in Beijing has decided to go public. George Thomas got exclusive access to their leaders and meetings and reports from Beijing.
On a recent Sunday morning, a few blocks from Beijing's financial district, hundreds of Christians gathered to worship God.
20 years ago, we would have never permitted you to film our meeting. But today, China is changing, and the church has to change as well.
Jin Tiangming pastors one of the largest so-called underground churches in Beijing. This is the first time since founding his church 17 years ago that he's opened the service to cameras.
We worship in secret for years. We were spread out across the city, meeting in different people's homes.
Then a couple of years ago, the church decided to come out of hiding. They rented space in a small office building and began meeting together in one location. Liu Gan is an elder in the church.
We brought all the small house churches together in one place, even though it was a huge security risk. But this was an important first step.
Next, they went public.
We felt that God was calling our church to be a city on a hill, a light on the mountaintop. To do this, we had to open up.
Members began openly inviting non-believers to the meetings. The church began to grow. Liu says some 1,000 people regularly attend the weekly service, and often it's standing room only.
In my church, we gathered so many members of Christians. They all have the passion. They want to be a good witness to the society.
Such open proselytizing is still forbidden in China. Technically, this is also an illegal gathering, since the church hasn't registered with the government, nor is it part of any of the state-sanctioned churches. But the authorities have chosen to turn a blind eye.
Today is Communist China's new and global manifesto, militant and menacing.
It's a far cry from the dark days of the Cultural Revolution, when authorities burned churches, temples, and mosques to the ground. Pastors and Christians were routinely arrested and labeled counter-revolutionaries. Today, Chinese government data and international surveys report millions of Chinese people are flocking to religions like Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, and Islam. But it's Christianity that's experiencing the most dramatic growth. Trying to get precise figures on the number of Christians today in China is extremely difficult, but clearly they are part of mainstream society today. All the more experts say that Christians, especially those who are part of the so-called house church, go public. Recently, Shuang Church did something that would have been unthinkable decades ago. They began holding secret talks with government authorities in Beijing, including with members of the city's security bureau.
In our perspective, we are making progress, and we are having dialogue with them better and better.
But this is a church that has faced its share of challenges. You see, a couple of years ago, they were looking for a new home, in essence, because they were growing so fast. They found a location, they had approached a landlord with a price, and the landlord agreed. They paid the money, but then the authorities began to put pressure on the landlord.
The government didn't want us to move into this new location, so they started harassing the landlord not to sell us the property.
On November 1st, 2009, in the middle of a bitter winter storm and with no suitable place to meet, 500 members of Shuang Church met in an outdoor park to worship and publicly protest the government's pressure.
We wanted the authorities to know that our goal was to meet in one place. We had found a place, and we didn't want to go back to meeting in secret and in small groups. So now we were willing to meet in the open. It was a bold move.
Well, the government wasn't going to let that happen, so instead of rounding them up and throwing them into jail, the authorities asked Shuang's leaders to go back indoors. They agreed, but finding a suitable place to meet on short notice was difficult. In a surprising move, the government stepped in and offered the church space in this building, a theater owned and operated by China's powerful People's Liberation Army. Liu Gang says it was a significant gesture, one that he and many others hope will pave the way for China's house churches to be legally recognized.
That's why we exist.
Mm-hmm. That's why you exist?
Yeah.
That's what you want. That's your ultimate goal?
Yeah.
To be recognized legally?
Yeah.
George Thomas, CBN News, in Beijing, China.
We created this website as a place where kids can learn the Bible in a whole new way.
Kids will love Superbook.tv. Their games, the ability to create your own personal Superbook characters. We even have a place for kids to listen to music on Superbook Radio.
Superbook is CBN's animated series that teaches the Bible through the eyes of two friends and their robot sidekick. We're going to tell stories all the way from creation to Christ's return.
The website also teaches kids life lessons. Parents can spend time online with their kids learning about the Bible.
Superbook and Superbook.tv are entirely gospel-centered, and by supporting it, you'll help bring God's Word to children all over the world.
We're reaching a new generation with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Together, we can give today's kids the truth of the Bible in a fun and exciting way that will change their lives.
Visit Superbook.tv today.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy?
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
Christian World News, your window to the global church. For stories of revival,
Another revival.
persecution,
relatives and fellow Christians mourn in
the first country over the international date line.
I'm George Thomas in Baghdad, and coming up on the broadcast, an exclusive interview.
and the impact of Christian leaders. Watch Christian World News.
Well, that's going to do it for us. This show went really fast, didn't it? Well, you can find out information on all the stories you've seen here at our website, cwnews.org. And you can also stay up to date with CWN on Facebook. Well, until next week, goodbye. And from all of us here at Christian World News, remember, God loves you. God bless you.